Jiho wiped the grease from his hands with an old cloth and looked around his small workshop. Tools were scattered everywhere. Broken hoverbikes sat in corners waiting for repairs. The smell of motor oil and metal filled the air. This was his life now, fixing things that barely worked for people who could barely pay. The workshop sat in the lowest level of New Seoul Station, far from the bright lights and clean air of the upper decks. Down here, everything was old and broken. The walls were stained with years of smoke and grime. Water dripped from pipes overhead, making small puddles on the concrete floor. Jiho had inherited this place from his father 3 years ago. Then, he thought he could make it something better. He had dreams of expanding, maybe even moving to a better part of the station. But dreams cost money, and money was something he never seemed to have enough of. He picked up his wrench and bent over the hoverbike engine he was working on. The owner needed it back by tomorrow, but the power core was completely fried. He would have to find a replacement somewhere, probably from the scrap dealers who asked too many questions and charged too much. A loud buzzing sound made him look up. Through the dirty window, he could see a delivery drone hovering outside. This was strange. Nobody ever sent him anything expensive enough to need a drone delivery. Most of his customers just walked their broken machines down to his shop. The drone was bigger than the usual ones. It was sleek and silver, clearly expensive. A red light blinked on its front as it scanned the area. Then it moved toward his workshop. Doran extended a mechanical arm. Jiho opened the door and stepped back as the drone entered. It was carrying a large metal container, about the size of a coffin. The container was covered in strange symbols and had small lights blinking along its edges. It looked alien, which meant it was probably worth more than everything in his workshop combined. The drone set the container down gently on his workbench, then extended another arm holding a datapad. A mechanical voice spoke in perfect Korean. "Delivery. For Jiho Park, please confirm identity with thumbprint." Jiho pressed his thumb to the pad, still staring at the container. Who would send him something like this? He barely knew anyone who could afford to eat in the upper levels, let alone send expensive alien packages. The drone's lights changed from red to green. Identity confirmed. Package delivered from the estate of Kyung Park. Legal documents attached. Have a pleasant day. The drone flew back out through the door, leaving Jiho alone with the mysterious container and a pile of papers covered in symbols. He could not read Kyung Park. The name brought back distant memories. Brother, but Jiho had only met him a few times when he was very young. Kyung had been different from the rest of the family. While everyone else worked normal jobs on the station, Kyung had gone into space. He became a trader, traveling between worlds and dealing with aliens. The family had not talked about Kangyang much. Some said he had gotten involved with dangerous people. Others whispered that he had made too many deals with the wrong aliens. Jiho had not even known his uncle was dead. He picked up the datapad and tried to make sense of the documents. Were written in alien languages, but there were a few pages in Korean at the end. The legal language was hard to understand, but the basic message was clear. Kyung had died somewhere in the outer systems, and he had left something to his nephew Jiho. The container had several locks and security seals. It took Jiho 20 minutes to figure out how to open them all. Cold mist poured out as the temperature inside adjusted to the room. Inside was the strangest animal Jiho had ever seen. It looked like a big cat, similar to the leopards he had seen in nature documentaries. Fur so pale, it almost seemed to glow. Its eyes were bright red, like rubies. It was clearly alien, but it looked almost Earth-like at the same time. The creature was sleeping, but as the mist cleared, it began to stir. Its red eyes opened and focused on Jiho for a moment. They just stared at each other. Then the creature stretched, showing claws that looked sharp enough to cut metal. It stood up slowly, and Jiho realized how big it really was. From nose to tail, it was nearly 2 meters long. Out of the container and onto his workbench, the creature looked around the workshop, its red eyes taking in everything. Then it looked back at Jiho and made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a growl. It did not sound happy. Jiho took a step back. He had no idea how to take care of an alien animal. He barely had enough money to feed himself, let alone a creature this size, and from the way it was looking at him, he was not sure it wanted to be taken care of. The creature jumped down from the workbench and began walking around the workshop. It sniffed at tools and machine parts, sometimes touching things with its paws. Its movements were graceful, but somehow purposeful, as if it was looking for something specific. When it reached the old communication array in the corner, it stopped. The array had not worked in years. The creature reached up with one paw and touched the main control panel. Nothing happened, of course. The power had been disconnected long ago, but the creature seemed disappointed. It made that growling purr sound again, louder this time. Jiho realized he needed to give the creature a name. Looking at its white fur and the way it seemed to glow in the dim light of the workshop, he thought of the sky. "Hanyul," he said out loud. "I will call you Hanyul." The creature turned to look at him when he spoke. For just a moment, Jiho thought he saw something in those red eyes, something that looked almost like intelligence. But that was impossible. It was just an animal, even if it was an alien one. Hanyul walked over to a pile of spare parts and knocked them over with her paw. Then she moved to a shelf of tools and pushed several onto the floor. Within minutes, she had made a mess of half the workshop. Jiho sighed and started picking up the scattered parts. This was going to be a problem. He could not afford to keep a pet, especially one that seemed determined to destroy everything he owned. But what choice did he have? The legal documents made it clear that he was now responsible for the creature as he cleaned up the mess. Jiho wondered what his uncle had been thinking. Why would Kyung leave him an alien animal? This particular creature seemed so different from any pet he had ever seen. Hanyul watched him work, her red eyes following his every movement. Sometimes she would tilt her head as if she was trying to understand what he was doing. Other times, she would make soft sounds that almost seemed like she was trying to communicate. But that was impossible. She was just an animal. A very expensive, very troublesome animal that was going to make his already difficult life much more complicated. Jiho. 3 days had passed since Hanyul arrived, and Jiho was beginning to think his uncle had played a cruel joke on him. The white creature had turned his workshop into a disaster zone. She knocked over tools, scattered parts, and seemed to take special pleasure in destroying anything he tried to organize. But there were things about Hanyul that did not make sense. Things that made Jiho stop and wonder if she was really just an animal. That morning, Jiho was working on a broken navigation computer when he heard a soft, clicking sound behind him. He turned to see Hanyul sitting in front of his old fabrication unit. Her paws were moving over the control panel with surprising precision. The clicks were coming from her claws as they touched specific buttons in a pattern. "Hey, get away from that," Jiho said, walking over to pull her back. But when he looked at the display screen, his mouth fell open. The fabrication unit was running. A diagnostic program. A program he had never seen before. Complex data scrolled across the screen faster than he could read it. Hanyul looked up at him and made a soft, chirping sound. Then she touched 3 more buttons, and the machine began producing a small metal part. When it finished, she picked up the part with her teeth and carried it over to the broken hoverbike engine. The part fit perfectly. It was exactly what Jiho had been looking for to complete the repair. Jiho stared at Hanyul, then at the part, then back at Hanyul. "How did you know what I needed?" Hanyul tilted her head and made another chirping sound. Then she walked back to the fabrication unit and began working the controls again. This was impossible. No animal could understand complex machinery like this. But Hanyul was not just pushing buttons randomly. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every movement was deliberate and precise. Over the next few hours, Jiho watched as Hanyul helped him. With repairs in ways that should have been impossible, she seemed to understand the function of every tool and machine in the workshop. When he struggled with a particularly difficult problem, she would approach and somehow guide him to the solution. But the strangest thing was how she communicated. She would make different sounds for different situations. A low purr when something was working correctly. A sharp chirp when he was about to make a mistake. A rumbling growl when she was frustrated with his slow progress. It was almost like she was trying to teach him that evening. As Jiho was closing up the workshop, he heard voices outside. He looked through the window and saw 3 figures standing. In the alley, they were tall and thin, clearly not human, even in the dim light. He could see their gray skin and elongated heads. Aliens were not uncommon on New Sol Station, but these 3 looked different. They wore matching black uniforms with strange symbols on the chest. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. One of them was holding a scanning device, The device beeped softly as it swept across the buildings. When it pointed toward workshop, the beeping became faster and louder. Jiho felt a chill run down his spine. He turned to look for Hanyul and found her crouched low beside his workbench. Her red eyes were fixed on the window, and her white fur was standing on end. She was making a sound he had never heard before, a low, threatening growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor. The alien with the scanner said something in a harsh, clicking language. The other two raised their weapons and began walking toward the workshop door. Hanyul moved faster than Jiho thought possible. She leaped across the room and landed beside him. Then she did something that made his blood freeze. She grabbed his shirt with her teeth and began pulling him toward the back of the workshop. "What are you doing?" Jiho whispered. But Hanyul was already dragging him toward a section of wall he had never paid much attention to. She released his shirt and began clawing at the wall with her paws. To Jiho's amazement, a section of the wall slid aside, revealing a hidden passage. The passage was dark and narrow, barely wide enough for a person to walk through. Hanyul looked back at him and made an urgent chirping sound. Then she disappeared into the darkness. Jiho heard the aliens trying to break down his front door. He had no choice but to follow Hanyul into the passage. As soon as he stepped inside, the wall section slid back into place behind him. The passage was completely dark, but he could hear Hanyul moving ahead of him. He followed the sound of her paws on the metal floor, trying not to think about where they were going or how Hanyul had known about this place. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they emerged into another room. This one was larger than his workshop, filled with equipment he did not recognize. Everything was covered in dust, as if it had been abandoned for years. Hanyul led him to a corner, where several large crates were stacked. She climbed onto one of the crates and began working at something with her claws. A moment later, a soft light filled the room. Now Jiho could see where they were. The room was some kind of storage facility, but not for normal supplies. The equipment looked advanced, far beyond anything he had seen before. Some of it was clearly alien in design. Hanyul jumped down from the crate and walked over to a wall-mounted display screen. She began touching controls with her paws, and the screen came to life. Images flashed across it too quickly for Jiho to understand, but Hanyul seemed to know exactly what she was looking for. Finally, the screen showed a view of Jiho's workshop. He could see the three aliens inside, searching through his tools and equipment with their scanning devices. They were looking for something specific, and they seemed frustrated that they could not find it. One of the aliens picked up the empty container that Hanyul had arrived in. He examined it carefully, then spoke to the others in their clicking language. They all turned to look at the container, and Jiho could see the anger in their posture. "They are looking for you," Jiho whispered to Hanyul. Hanyul turned away from the screen and looked at him with those intelligent red eyes. For the first time since she had arrived, Jiho saw something in her expression that looked almost human. It looked like sadness. She walked over to another section of equipment and began working the controls. This time, the display showed star charts and navigation data. She touched specific points on the star map, tracing what looked like travel, routes between different systems. Then she did something that made Jiho's heart skip a beat. She touched a control that brought up text in Korean. The words appeared slowly, as if the system was translating from another language. Vakari Empire. Military Search Unit. Target: Lost Royal Bloodline. Status: Escaped. Reward: Significant. Jiho read the words twice before their meaning sank in. The aliens in his workshop were not just random visitors. They were soldiers from something called the Vakari Empire, and they were hunting for someone with royal blood. Someone who had escaped. He looked at Hanyul, who was still watching the display screen. Her white fur seemed to glow in the soft light, and her red eyes held depths of intelligence that no ordinary animal should possess. "What are you?" Jiho asked quietly. Hanyul turned to look at him. She made a soft sound that was neither purr nor a growl. Then she walked over to him and gently pressed her head against his hand. For the first time since she had arrived, her touch felt gentle instead of destructive. It felt like gratitude. On the display screen, the Vakari soldiers were leaving. His workshop, they had not found what they were looking for, but Jiho knew they would be back. And next time, they might not give up so easily. He looked down at Hanyul, who was still pressed against his side. Whatever she really was, she had saved his life tonight. She had known about the hidden passage and the secret room. She had understood the danger before he even realized it existed. His Uncle Kyung had not left him just an alien pet. He had left him something far more dangerous and far more valuable. He had left him someone who was being hunted by an alien empire. Jiho knew that his life would never be simple again. Jiho and Hanyul spent the night in the hidden room. He did not sleep much. Every sound made him think the Vakari soldiers had found them. Hanyul seemed more relaxed, but her red eyes stayed alert, watching the entrance to their hiding place. Morning came. Hanyul led him deeper into the hidden passages. Jiho was amazed to discover an entire network of tunnels and rooms beneath the lower levels of the station. Some looked abandoned, while others contained equipment that was still running. "How did you know about all this?" Jiho asked as they walked. Through a corridor lined with pipes and cables, Hanyul looked back at him and made a soft, chirping sound. Then she continued walking, leading him toward a destination only she seemed to know. They stopped at a heavy metal door marked with warning, symbols in several languages. Hanyul sat down in front of the door and looked at Jiho expectantly. When he tried the handle, he found it was locked with an electronic security system. The lock required a thumbprint scanner and a password. Jiho was about to give up when Hanyul stood and pressed her paw against the scanner. To his surprise, the scanner accepted her paw print and turned green. A keyboard appeared on the screen, asking for a password. Hanyul looked at Jiho and made an urgent chirping sound. She pointed with her nose toward the keyboard, then back at him. "You want me to type something?" Jiho asked. "But I do not know the password." Hanyul began making a series of different sounds, chirps, purrs, and small growls in a specific pattern. She repeated the pattern 3 times, looking at Jiho each time she finished. Finally, Jiho understood. She was trying to tell him letters or numbers. He had been listening to her sounds for days now, and he was beginning to recognize patterns. In the way she communicated, the first sound was a sharp chirp. The second was a low purr. The third was a medium growl. She continued through the pattern, and Jiho tried to match each sound to a letter or number. After several attempts, he typed in KWUNGPRK, his uncle's name. The door unlocked with a soft click. Beyond the door was a small room that looked like an office. The walls were covered with star charts, alien documents, and photographs. A desk sat in the center with an old computer terminal and several data storage devices. Jiho recognized some of the photographs. They showed his Uncle Kyung with various alien beings in what looked like trading posts and spaceports. But other photos were different. They showed Kyung in formal settings, wearing expensive clothes, and meeting with beings who looked important. Hanyul walked directly to the desk and began working the computer terminal with her paws. The screen came to life, showing a video recording of Uncle Kyung. He looked older than Jiho remembered, and tired. "If you are watching this, Jiho, then I am probably dead," Kyung's recorded voice said. "And you have met my most important cargo." Jiho sat down heavily in the desk chair. Hanyul jumped onto the desk beside the computer and settled down to watch the recording with him. "The creature you know as an animal is actually Empress Nari of the Vakari Empire," Kyung continued. "She is the rightful ruler of one of the most powerful civilizations in this galaxy." Jiho looked at Hanyul in shock. She looked back at him with those intelligent red eyes, and suddenly everything made sense. The way she understood complex machinery, her tactical thinking when the soldiers came, the sadness he had seen in her expression. Nari was overthrown by her own military commanders, the recording explained. They believed her peaceful policies made the empire weak. They wanted to expand through conquest instead of trade and diplomacy. On the screen, Kyung pulled out a data pad and showed it to the camera. The Vakari royal family carries a rare genetic condition. Under extreme stress or trauma, they can undergo a physical transformation. It is meant to be a survival mechanism, but something went wrong with Nara's transformation. Jiho watched in fascination as Kyung explained how the Empress had been forced to flee during a military coup. The transformation that should have lasted only hours had become permanent, trapping her in the form of what appeared to be an animal. She retains all her intelligence and memories, Kyung said, but she cannot communicate normally. and most beings see her as nothing more than an unusual pet. This has kept her safe from those who would kill her, but it has also made her a prisoner in her own body. The recording showed technical diagrams and medical data. Jiho could not understand most of it, but the basic message was clear. The transformation could be reversed, but only with special equipment and medical knowledge found on the Valkyrie homeworld. I was helping her reach allies who could restore her true form, Kyung continued. But my health is failing, and I know I will not complete this mission. That is why I am leaving her with you, Jiho. Jiho felt overwhelmed. Why me? I am just a mechanic. I do not know anything about alien empires or royal transformations. On the screen, his uncle smiled. You are more than just a mechanic, nephew. You have something the Valkyrie do not understand. You have human creativity and stubbornness. You solve problems in ways they would never think of. Their technology is advanced, but it follows predictable patterns. Yours does not. Kyung leaned closer to the camera. The Valkyrie military is looking for a lost empress. They will never think to look for her in the workshop of a poor human mechanic. And if they do find her, they will not expect that mechanic to fight back with jury-rigged human engineering. The recording showed more technical data about the transformation process. Kyung had managed to gather some of the equipment needed for the cure, but not all of it. The most important components were still on the Valkyrie homeworld, locked away in the Royal Medical Archives. The mission seems impossible, Kyung admitted. The Valkyrie homeworld is the most heavily defended planet in their empire. But humans have a reputation for doing impossible things. You find ways to make broken machines work, with spare parts and determination. Maybe you can find a way to make this work too. Hanyul made a soft purring sound and gently touched Jiho's hand with her paw. He looked down at her, still trying to process everything he had learned. This was not just an unusual alien pet. This was an empress, a ruler of billions of beings, across dozens of star systems. And she had been living in his dirty workshop, eating scraps and sleeping on old machinery. I know this is a lot to ask, Kyung's voice continued, but Nari represents something important. She believes different species can work together peacefully. Her enemies want to turn the Valkyrie Empire into a military machine that conquers everything in its path. If she dies, millions of beings will suffer under their rule. The recording began to wind down. Kyung looked directly into the camera with serious eyes. I have left you all the information and equipment I could gather. The rest is up to you. And Nari trust her judgment, Jiho. She has ruled an empire. She knows more about strategy and politics than anyone you will ever meet. The screen went dark, leaving Jiho alone with his thoughts and the creature who was apparently an empress. He looked at Henwell or Nari, trying to see her differently now. The regal way she held herself, the intelligence in her red eyes, the careful way she moved, as if she was always thinking several steps ahead. So you are really an empress? He said quietly. Nari made a soft chirping sound and nodded her head. It was a very human gesture, and seeing it made Jiho realize how much she had been holding back. She had been trying to communicate with him for days, but he had thought she was just an animal. Now he understood why she had been so frustrated. She was used to commanding starships and making decisions that affected entire worlds. Instead, she was trapped in a form that could barely make itself understood to one confused human mechanic. But she had also saved his life. When the Valkyrie soldiers came looking for her, she could have hidden and let them take him. Instead, she had led him to safety and shared her secret with him. Jiho reached out and gently touched her white fur. I do not know if I can help you. Get back to your real form, he said, but I promise I will try. Nari pressed her head against his hand and made a sound that seemed like gratitude. For the first time since she had arrived, she looked hopeful. Jiho turned back to the computer and began studying the technical data his uncle had left behind. He did not understand most of it yet, but he was a mechanic. He was used to figuring out how broken things worked, and right now, he had the most important repair job of his life. Over the next 2 weeks, everything changed between Jiho and Nari. Now that he knew who she really was, he began to see her differently. Every movement she made seemed purposeful and intelligent. Every sound she made was an attempt to communicate something important. They developed their own language together. Nari would make different sounds for yes and no. She used her paws to point at things or draw simple shapes on dusty surfaces. When she wanted to show him something complex, she would use the computer terminals in the hidden room. Ji-ho spent hours studying the technical data his uncle had left behind. The Vakari transformation process was incredibly complex, involving both genetic changes and energy field manipulation. The cure required special medical equipment that only existed in the royal archives on the Vakari homeworld. "It seems impossible," Ji-ho said one morning as he looked at star charts showing the Vakari Empire. "Their homeworld has defense systems that could destroy entire fleets. How are we supposed to get past all of that?" Nari walked over to the computer and began working the controls with her paws. She brought up displays showing human technology and Vakari security systems side by side. Then she started highlighting differences between them. The Vakari technology was elegant and sophisticated. Their security systems were designed to detect and counter other advanced civilizations. But human technology was different. It was crude and unpredictable. Where Vakari systems expected complex energy signatures, human machines used simple mechanical principles. "You think they would not expect human technology," Ji-ho said. Beginning to understand, Nari made her yes chirp and continued. Working the computer, she showed him examples of human engineering solutions that had surprised alien civilizations in the past. Humans had a reputation for making impossible things work through sheer determination and creative thinking. As they studied together, Ji-ho began to understand why his uncle had chosen him for this mission. The Vakari military was looking for sophisticated rescue attempts using advanced technology. They would never expect a simple human mechanic to attempt something so dangerous. But first, they needed help. This was not a mission for two beings. Working alone, Nari had been using the computer to contact old allies throughout the galaxy. Many of her former supporters had been killed or imprisoned after the military coup, but some had escaped. A few were still loyal to their true empress. The first ally to arrive was Daeho, a former Vakari military engineer who had served in the royal fleet. He was tall and thin like the soldiers who had searched Ji-ho's workshop, but his gray skin had a different pattern of markings. When he saw Nari in her transformed state, he immediately knelt down and bowed his head. "My empress," he said in accented Korean. "I have been searching for you across half the galaxy." Nari made a series of chirping sounds, and Daeho nodded as if he understood perfectly. Ji-ho realized that some Vakari could still communicate with her, probably because they knew what to listen for. "She says you are the human who has been protecting her," Daeho said to Ji-ho. "She speaks highly of your courage and intelligence." Ji-ho felt embarrassed. "I am just a mechanic. I do not know anything about royal protocols or empire politics." Daeho smiled, showing sharp teeth. "That may be exactly what we need. The current regime expects us to think like Vakari. They will not expect us to think like humans." The second ally was Mira, a human smuggler who had worked with Uncle Kyung for many years. She arrived in a ship that looked like it was held together, with spare parts and hope, but Ji-ho could tell it was faster than it appeared. "So this is the famous empress," Mira said when she saw Nari. "Kyung told me stories about her, but I thought he was making them up." Mira was practical and direct. She had connections throughout the galaxy and knew how to move people and cargo without attracting attention. More importantly, she understood how human technology could be used in unexpected ways. The third ally surprised everyone. Usung was young for a Vakari, barely out of adolescence by their standards. He came from a noble family that had supported the empress before the coup. His family had been executed, but he had escaped and been hiding ever since. "I pledge my life to your service, my empress," he said when he met Nari. "My family died believing in your vision of peace between species." Nari made soft, sad sounds. When she heard about his family, she touched his hand gently with her paw, and Ji-ho could see that she felt responsible for their deaths. With their small team assembled, they began serious planning for the impossible mission. The Vakari homeworld was protected by 3 layers of defense. First, patrol fleets that intercepted any ship before it reached the outer system. Second, orbital defense platforms that could destroy anything the patrol fleets missed. Third, planetary shields and ground-based weapons that made landing impossible for enemy forces. "How did anyone ever conquer that world in the past?" Ji-ho asked. "No one ever has," Daeho replied. The Vakari Empire expanded outward from their homeworld, but the homeworld itself has never fallen to outside attack. They spent days studying the defense systems, looking for weaknesses. The Vakari technology was impressive, but it was also predictable. It followed logical patterns and responded to threats in expected ways. "What if we do not try to fight our way through?" Jiho suggested. "What if we try to sneak past instead?" Mira nodded approvingly. "Smugglers always think about sneaking first and fighting second. What did you have in mind?" Jiho had been studying the technical specifications of Vakari sensors. They were designed to detect energy signatures, weapon systems, and drive technologies, used by known civilizations, but human technology used different principles. "My old hoverbike engine uses chemical combustion instead of energy cells," he explained. "Their sensors might not recognize it as a propulsion system. And human electronics use different frequencies than Vakari technology." Daeho looked interested. "You want to build a ship using primitive human technology?" "Not primitive," Jiho corrected. "Different. Unexpected. If we can make it look like space junk or a natural object, we might be able to drift past their sensors without triggering alarms." Nari made excited chirping sounds and ran to the computer. She began showing them technical diagrams of Vakari sensor arrays. Her knowledge of the defense systems was detailed and current. She had helped design some of them when she was Empress. Working together, they began to plan a ship that would be invisible to Vakari technology. It would use human mechanical systems instead of energy-based propulsion. Its hull would be made from materials that would look like space debris on their sensors. Its electronics would operate on frequencies the Vakari never monitored. "It will be slow and uncomfortable," Mira warned. "And if anything goes wrong, we will have no backup systems." "But it might work," Wusang added. "The current regime has made the defense systems even more sophisticated than they were under the Empress. They are so focused on detecting advanced threats that they might miss a simple one." As they planned, Jiho found himself working more closely with Nari than ever before. She could not speak, but she communicated complex ideas through gestures, computer displays, and the series of sounds they had developed together. Sometimes, late at night when the others were sleeping, Jiho would find Nari staring at the star charts showing her homeworld. Her red eyes would look sad and distant, and he knew she was thinking about the empire she had lost and the people who had died because of the military coup. "We will get you home," he promised during one of these quiet moments. "We will find a way to restore your true form and take back your empire." Nari looked at him and made a soft purring sound. Then she did something that surprised him. She rested her head against his shoulder, the way a friend might seek comfort. In that moment, Jiho realized that their relationship had changed. She was no longer just an alien creature he was trying to help. She was no longer just an empress he was serving. She had become his friend and partner, and he would do anything to help her succeed. Building their disguised ship took 3 months. They worked in an abandoned shipyard on the outer edge of the station. Far from prying eyes, the ship looked like nothing special from the outside. Its hull was made from recycled materials and salvaged parts. But inside, every system had been carefully designed to avoid Vakari detection. Jiho had rebuilt his old hoverbike engines to power the ship. Instead of energy cells, they ran on chemical fuel that burned at temperatures too low. For most sensors to notice, the navigation system used mechanical gyroscopes instead of quantum computers. Even the life support system worked on simple air pumps and filters. "It looks like a garbage scow," Mira said as she inspected their finished work. "That is exactly what we want," Jiho replied. "If it looks valuable, they will scan it carefully. If it looks like junk, they might ignore it completely." Nari had been working with Daeho to program their infiltration route. Using her knowledge of the palace layout and security protocols, they had identified the best path to the Royal Medical Archives. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. They would approach the Vakari homeworld, disguised as a derelict ship drifting on a collision course with the planet. The defense systems would detect them, but hopefully too late to do anything except track their impact site. They would crash land in a remote area and make their way to the capital city on foot. Once inside the palace, they would need to reach the medical archives, retrieve the transformation cure, and escape before the military discovered their presence. Simple in theory, but incredibly dangerous in practice. "What happens if we get caught?" Wusong asked as they made final preparations. "We do not get caught," Nari replied through Daeho's translation. "Failure means death for all of us, and continued suffering for billions of beings throughout the Empire." The journey to the Vakari homeworld took 2 weeks. Their disguised ship moved slowly through space, using minimal power to avoid detection. They had to drift for days at a time, making tiny course corrections to stay on target. Jiho spent most of the journey working on their equipment and making backup plans. He had built portable versions of the tools they would need, each one designed to work without sophisticated technology. If their main equipment failed, they would have to improvise with whatever they could find. Nari stayed close to him during the long journey. She seemed nervous as they got closer to her homeworld, and Jiho could understand why. She was returning to a place where she had once ruled, but now she would be hunted as a criminal. On the last day of their approach, they detected the outer patrol fleets. Huge Vakari warships moved in formation around the system, their sensors, sweeping space for any sign of threat. The ships were beautiful and deadly, with sleek hulls that gleamed in the light of the system's twin suns. "They are scanning us," Daeho reported from the sensor station. Everyone held their breath as the patrol ships examined their disguised vessel. On their screens, they could see the Vakari ships changing course to get a better look at them. "We look like a derelict cargo hauler that lost power," Mira said, reading their false identification signals. "Hull breaches, life support failing, no response to communications." One of the patrol ships moved closer, close enough that they could see its weapon systems powering up. If the Vakari decided to investigate more carefully, the mission would end before it began. But after several tense minutes, the patrol ship turned away. The Vakari had decided they were exactly what they appeared to be, space junk that posed no threat to anyone. "First barrier cleared," Jiho whispered. The orbital defense platforms were more challenging. These were massive structures that surrounded the planet, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. Their sensors were more sophisticated than the patrol ships, and they scanned everything that came within range. But once again, their disguise held. The platforms identified them as debris that would burn up in the atmosphere, nothing worth wasting ammunition on. They were allowed to continue their descent toward the planet's surface. The crash landing was the most dangerous part of their plan. They had to make it look real without actually destroying their ship or killing themselves. Jiho had designed breakaway sections that would separate on impact, making it appear that their ship had been torn apart. They hit the ground in a remote mountain region, far from any major cities. The impact was violent, throwing everyone around the cabin, but the ship held together. Steam and smoke poured from their fake damage systems, completing the illusion of a crashed vessel. "Everyone alive?" Mira asked as they picked themselves up, alive and undetected. Daeho confirmed, checking his instruments. "No Vakari forces are responding to our crash site." They quickly gathered their equipment and abandoned the ship. From now on, they would have to travel on foot across hundreds of kilometers of alien terrain. The Vakari homeworld was beautiful, but dangerous, with predators and environmental hazards that could kill unwary travelers. Ari led them through the wilderness with confidence. This was her world, and she knew its dangers better than anyone. She guided them along hidden paths and showed them where to find food and water. Even in her transformed state, she was still their empress, protecting her people. It took them 5 days to reach the capital city. The city was enormous, with towers that reached toward the sky and transportation networks that moved millions of beings every day. At its center stood the Imperial Palace, a structure so large it could be seen from space. "How do we get inside?" Jiho asked as they studied the palace from their hiding spot in the city's outer districts. The palace was surrounded by energy barriers and patrolled by thousands of guards. Every entrance was monitored by sensors and defended by automated weapons. It looked completely impregnable, but Nari had grown up in that palace. She knew secrets that no military planner had ever discovered. Using their communication system, she explained how they could enter through ancient maintenance tunnels that had been forgotten for centuries. The tunnels were narrow and dark, filled with machinery that had been running automatically for generations. They crawled through pipes and conduits, following routes that Nari remembered from her childhood explorations. Finally, they reached the Royal Medical Archives, hidden deep beneath the palace foundations. The room was vast, filled with medical equipment and data storage systems that contained thousands of years of Vakari scientific knowledge. Nari ran directly to a specific storage unit and began working its controls. Inside was the equipment they needed to reverse her transformation. Technology so advanced that Jiho could barely understand how it worked. "Got it," he said, as they carefully packed the delicate instruments. "Now we just need to get out of here." Without being discovered, but as they prepared to leave, alarms began sounding throughout the palace. Red lights flashed, and the sound of running feet echoed through the corridors above them. "They know we are here," Deho said, checking his scanner. "Military units are converging on this location. Their escape route was cut off. They were trapped in the depths of the Imperial Palace with no way out, and the entire Vakari military, searching for them. Jiho looked at their small group, then at the transformation equipment they had risked everything to obtain. They had come so far and accomplished so much. But now it seemed like their mission would end in failure. Then Nari made a decision that surprised everyone. She walked over to the transformation equipment and began setting it up. She was not going to wait until they escaped. She was going to restore her true form right here, right now. "Are you sure?" Jiho asked. "We do not know if it will work, and once you change back, there will be no hiding who you are." Nari looked at him with those intelligent red eyes and made her yes chirp. She had made her choice. It was time to stop running and start fighting back. The transformation equipment hummed to life as Jiho worked frantically to set it up correctly. Above them, the sounds of searching soldiers grew louder. They had minutes at most before the military forces found their location. "The process will take time," Deho warned as he helped connect the complex medical devices, "and she will be vulnerable during the transformation. We need to hold them off." Mira was already setting up defensive positions near the archive entrance. "I can slow them down, but not for long. These Vakari soldiers have better weapons than anything we brought." Wusong took position beside her, his young face determined. "I will fight for my Empress, no matter what happens." Nari lay down on the transformation platform as energy fields began to surround her white fur. The process was clearly painful. She made sounds of distress as the genetic changes began to reverse themselves, but her red eyes stayed focused and determined. The first soldiers found them 10 minutes later. They blasted through the archive doors with energy weapons, filling the air with smoke and debris. Myra and Wusong returned fire, but they were badly outnumbered. "More coming down the main corridor," Deho reported, monitoring his scanner. "At least 50 soldiers. With heavy weapons." Jiho looked at the transformation equipment. The process was only halfway complete. They needed more time. But time was the one thing they did not have. Then he had an idea. A crazy, desperate idea that only a human mechanic would think of. "Keep them busy for 2 more minutes," he shouted to the others. Then he ran to the archive's main power system. The palace's power grid was incredibly sophisticated, designed to provide energy to thousands of systems throughout the massive structure. But, like all complex systems, it had a weakness. It relied on central control to coordinate everything. Jiho began pulling cables and rerouting connections with the basic tools he had brought. He was not trying to fix anything. He was trying to break it in very specific ways. "What are you doing?" Deho called out between shots at the advancing soldiers. "Creating chaos," Jiho replied as he jammed a metal bar into a control junction. "If I can overload the main power grid, it will shut down systems throughout the palace." Sparks flew as he deliberately short-circuited safety systems that had been designed to prevent exactly what he was doing. The Vakari had built their technology to be elegant and safe. They had not expected someone to sabotage it with crude mechanical force. The lights flickered, then went out completely. Emergency power systems tried to activate, but Jiho had damaged those connections too. Within seconds, entire sections of the palace lost power in the darkness. The attacking soldiers were confused and disoriented. Their sophisticated weapons needed power from the palace grid to function at full capacity. Their communication systems went down. Even their armor's life support systems began to fail. Now that is human engineering. Myra laughed as she took advantage of the confusion to drive back the soldiers. But Jiho was not finished. He moved to the environmental control systems and began making more creative adjustments. Soon, air circulation Fans throughout the palace were running at maximum speed. Fire suppression systems activated randomly, filling corridors with foam and chemical suppressants. Even the waste disposal systems began backing up. The entire palace is shutting down, Deho reported with amazement. You have created system failures on 17 different levels. Above them, they could hear soldiers shouting in confusion as they tried to navigate corridors filled with foam and smoke. Orders were being given, but without communication systems. Nobody knew what was happening. The transformation platform continued its work. Energy fields shifting and changing around Neris' form. Her white fur was beginning to change color, becoming more like normal Vakari skin. Her body shape was shifting, too, becoming more humanoid. Then new soldiers arrived, these ones carrying portable power supplies for their weapons. The leader was a tall Vakari with elaborate markings on his gray skin and medals on his uniform. Even in the dim emergency lighting, his presence commanded attention. General Taiyang Deho whispered with fear in his voice, the one who led the military coup. Taiyang surveyed this scene with cold intelligence. He saw the transformation equipment, the changing form on the platform, and the small group of defenders. His expression showed no surprise, only grim satisfaction. "So the lost empress finally reveals herself," he said in perfect Korean. "I had wondered when you would make your move, Nari, though I admit I did not expect you to bring human allies." Transformation was nearly complete now. Where the white leopard-like creature had been, a tall Vakari female was taking shape. Her skin was pale gray with silver markings, and her hair was white as snow. But her eyes were still the same intelligent red that Jeho had come to know so well. "You are too late, Taiyang," she said, her voice weak but clear. "I have returned to claim what is rightfully mine." Taiyang laughed harshly. "You returned to an empire that no longer wants you. Your peaceful policies made us weak. Under my rule, the Vakari have become the strongest military force in the galaxy." "Through conquest and oppression," Nari replied. "Sitting up on the platform, despite her obvious exhaustion, you have turned our people into tyrants." "I have made them survivors," Taiyang countered, "but none of that matters now. You will die here, along with your human friends." He raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the palace's security systems suddenly reactivated. Not the normal security systems, but ancient protocols that Nari had programmed decades ago during her reign. "Emergency succession protocol activated," a mechanical voice announced throughout the palace. "Genetic scan confirms presence of rightful heir. All military units stand down and report to throne room." Taiyang's expression changed from confidence to alarm. "That is impossible. I disabled those systems years ago." "You disabled the main ones," Nari said, standing now with regal dignity despite her physical weakness. "But I hid backup systems throughout the palace. Systems that only activate when the true empress returns." Throughout the palace, automated defenses turned against Taiyang's soldiers. Doors locked, trapping military units in small groups. Weapon suppressors activated, disabling energy guns. Communication jammers prevented coordination between different forces. Most importantly, the succession protocols began broadcasting throughout the Vakari Empire. Every world, every ship, every outpost received the same message: the true empress had returned. "You cannot hold power through force alone," Nari told Taiyang, as his own soldiers began lowering their weapons in confusion. "True leadership requires the consent of the people." On screens throughout the palace, images of Empress Nari appeared, alongside testimonials from loyal citizens who had been waiting for her return. Stories of oppression under the military regime were broadcast across the empire. Worlds that had been conquered began declaring their independence. Taiyang realized that his coup was falling apart, but he was not finished fighting. He raised his weapon again, aiming directly at Nari. "If I cannot rule the empire, then no one will," he snarled. But Jeho was ready for him. Throughout the entire confrontation, he had been working on one more mechanical surprise. As Taiyang pulled the trigger, a section of the floor gave way beneath him. He fell into a maintenance shaft that Jeho had rigged to open at exactly the right moment. "Human engineering wins again," Jeho said with satisfaction. Over the following days, the Vakari Empire transformed itself. Loyal military units arrested the remaining coup leaders. Worlds that had been conquered were offered independence. or voluntary membership in a new peaceful confederation. The brutal policies of the military regime were reversed. Empress Nari established a new form of government that included representatives from many different species, including humans. The empire became a commonwealth based on cooperation rather than domination. Jiho found himself appointed as the first human ambassador to the Vakari Commonwealth. His workshop was relocated to the Imperial Palace, where he continued fixing things that were broken. But now, instead of hover bikes and mining equipment, he worked on diplomatic problems and interspecies cooperation. "Do you ever miss the old workshop?" Nari asked him one day as they walked through the palace gardens. Jiho smiled, looking at the alien plants and the beings of many different species who now worked together in peace. "Sometimes," he admitted, "it was simpler then. Just me, my tools, and machines that needed fixing." "But now you fix much bigger things," Nari pointed out. "You help fix relationships between entire civilizations." "I suppose that is true," Jiho agreed, "though I still think mechanical problems are easier to solve than political ones." Nari laughed, a sound that was much more pleasant than the growls and chirps he had grown accustomed to. "Perhaps that is why you are so good at both. You approach every problem the same way, with creativity and determination." As they walked, Jiho reflected on how much his life had changed. A few months ago, he had been a poor mechanic, struggling to survive in the lower levels of a space station. Now he was an ambassador helping to reshape an interstellar civilization. It had all started with one grumpy albino alien leopard who had turned out to be an empress in disguise. Sometimes the most important changes in life came from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the best solutions came not from advanced technology or sophisticated planning, but from simple human stubbornness and the willingness to try something that everyone else thought was impossible. The grumpy leopard had indeed changed everything, just as the title promised. But in the end, it was the bond between a human mechanic and an alien empress that changed the galaxy forever.